The mind is like an iceberg, it floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water. Where ID was, there ego shall be. Being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise. The interpretation of dreams is the royal road to a knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind. The voice of the intellect is a soft one, but it does not rest until it has gained a hearing. Everywhere I go, I find a poet has been there before me. The first human who hurled an insult instead of a stone was the founder of civilization. The act of birth is the first experience of anxiety, and thus the source and prototype of the affect of anxiety. The goal of all life is death. One day, in retrospect, the years of struggle will strike you as the most beautiful. The mind is like a camera obscura, the pictures in the foreground are sharp and clear, while the ones in the background are dim and blurred. Most people do not really want freedom, because freedom involves responsibility, and most people are frightened of responsibility. The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. Religion is an illusion, and it derives its strength from the fact that it falls in with our instinctual desires. Time spent with cats is never wasted. The neurotic is a confabulator par excellence. He creates myths about himself and the world in which he lives. The ego is not master in its own house. Civilization began the first time an angry person cast a word instead of a rock. Anatomy is destiny. The only person with whom you have to compare yourself is you in the past. The great question that has never been answered, and which I have not yet been able to answer, despite my 30 years of research into the feminine soul, is, what does a woman want? Inhibitions and sublimations of instinctual impulses are the hallmarks of civilization. Unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. It is impossible to escape the impression that people commonly use false standards of measurement, that they seek power, success, and wealth for themselves and admire them in others, and that they underestimate what is of true value in life. The conscious mind may be compared to a fountain playing in the sun and falling back into the great subterranean pool of subconscious from which it rises. We are never so defenseless against suffering as when we love, never so helplessly unhappy as when we have lost our loved object or its love. One feels inclined to say that the intention that man should be happy is not included in the plan of creation. A man who has been the indisputable favorite of his mother keeps for life the feeling of a conqueror. One feels inclined to say that the intention that man should be happy is not included in the plan of creation. The mind is like an organism, striving to preserve its own existence and to fend off anything that threatens it. It is often the perception of an unpleasant state of affairs rather than the state itself that gives rise to our feeling of unhappiness. The ego is not a master in its own house, but it should at least be its own housekeeper. One is very crazy when in love. The most complicated achievements of thought are possible without the assistance of consciousness. Anxiety is a natural part of life, but when it becomes excessive and uncontrollable, it can be a sign of deeper psychological issues. The interpretation of dreams is the royal road to a knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind. We are what we are because we have been what we have been. Illusion is the first of all pleasures. The interpretation of dreams is the via regia to a knowledge of the unconscious element in our physical life. The unconscious is the true psychic reality. In its innermost nature it is as much unknown to us as the reality of the external world, and it is as incompletely presented by the data of consciousness as is the external world by the communications of our sense organs. The physician should not treat the disease but the patient who is suffering from it. The mind is a labyrinth, where each turn reveals a new possibility. The mind is a battlefield, where reason and passion are locked in eternal combat. The only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of your life, your memories, your attachments. They burn them all away. But they're not punishing you, they're freeing your soul. The family is the nucleus of civilization. The ego is not sharply separated from the outside world, it extends tentacles outward and reacts to everything that happens around it. The mind is a strange beast, full of quirks and idiosyncrasies that make it difficult to understand and predict. Neurosis is the inability to tolerate ambiguity. The mind is like a camera, capturing moments and impressions that shape our perceptions of the world. The artist is a gambler who plays for high stakes, betting on his own vision, always taking the risk of rejection, of criticism, of failure, and of commercial indifference. Wherever one goes, one always finds that the language of the unconscious is the same.